Welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about Internet of Things or threads. The basic purpose of this talk is to understand the design and structure of IoT botnets. We are going to focus on different techniques and tactics opted by attackers to launch attacks using IoT devices. But first of all, I'm really thankful to Hack in Paris Security Conference committee members for giving me this opportunity to present this research in front of you. I hope in the next 1 hour or so, we are going to have a great time ahead understanding the IoT threats. So let's get it started. Before moving further, I would like to call a disclaimer here. The research that we are going to present in this talk is basically sharing security research with the community and building more intelligence so that we can subvert attacks in the real time. The purpose is very simple, that we have to build strong prevention and detection security solution so that we can protect our critical assets against internet attacks. So let's move forward and start our discussion. A brief background of mine. I've been in this industry for 14 years, written 2 or 3 different books. The recent one is Empirical Cloud Security. Previous one was Targeted Cyber Attacks. With that, if you are interested in going more about the work that have been done in the recent years, you can visit the portal or you can follow me on Twitter as well. Otherwise, you can just check my profile on LinkedIn to understand what we have been doing in this field and why we are going to talk about IoT threats based on the research that we have conducted in recent times. So what is the agenda? So in this talk, we're going to focus on understanding IoT threats. We will understand how we really need to go ahead and hunt IoT botnets. We're also going to talk about in detail attack mechanisms and characteristics of different IoT bots. Then we'll take a look into different IoT botnet C&C panels. We will have a few demos as well, highlighting how these IoT botnet command and control panels look like. But let's first start with the IoT threats. In recent times, you must have realized the attacks utilizing IoT devices as launchpads have increased exponentially. A few media headlines have been presented here to show how critical this problem is. Well, personally, I always believe that in order to solve any sort of problem, we really need to formulate the problem very well. And then comes the solution. Right now, the way digital evolution is happening, or you can say digital transformation is happening, the internet is fetching with more and more IoT devices, which means the attack landscape is changing as well. More IoT devices on the internet, more they are going to be targeted by attackers. And that's a serious problem. So the caution that comes to play is how we are going to secure these IoT devices, thereby making sure that we are going to have a strong security all around and we circumvent cyber attacks. However, these headlines explicitly states that how exactly the problem exists in this world at the moment and in which direction we really need to move forward. But the problem is real, and for that we have to invest a lot into security research and intelligence gathering activities so that we can build strong security solutions. Now let's first understand how we, as a security researcher, we need to hunt IoT bots. There are myriad of techniques that you can opt in, but as a part of this talk, we are going to discuss few. So what we have seen based on our research that Attackers are hosting IoT bots as a simple resources, as a files on the web servers that can be easily indexed. Interestingly, anonymous FTP servers are also being used by attackers to host IoT malware. Interestingly, with HTTP and FTP protocols, you can also generate direct downloadable links which can be distributed all across. For example, you can actually generate a direct link, and from the IoT device, you can use standard utilities like wget or curl to download the IoT bots on those compromised IoT devices. We'll talk more about it little later on. Another technique while analyzing IoT binaries is to extract hard-coded IP addresses. These IP addresses can be used for command and control communication. And once you have that information, you can extract interesting artifacts out of that as well, because you can connect back to C&C panel and then actually conduct penetration testing or some kind of additional assessment to generate more intelligence out of it. Memory forensics is an important technique as well. While running IoT malware on the devices, you can dump the memory, you can analyze the memory, and you can extract a lot of interesting information out of it as well. Identification and reconnaissance is also very important, because if you see some kind of like malicious communication happening from IoT device, you can conduct scanning in the same vicinity of those IP addresses and then try to see how the network traffic is being generated, and you can detect anomalies in that as well. With that, it becomes also easy for the security researcher to find the administrative panels. For example, you can use Telnet, FTP, HTTP to connect back to the C&C panel and see how it looks like. Broad scanning is also an important technique where we just conduct mass scanning and then try to feed some sort of signatures and see how effectively a particular IoT botnet infection is occurring. So there are many ways you can go ahead and detect and hunt IoT bots, but it is required, because until unless you have the good set of information, it is not possible to build intelligence to subvert IoT botnet infections. Continuing on the same part, we are going to talk about a little bit doing more than what we have did with the IoT binaries earlier. It's more focused on C&C panels. Like, can you compromise the IoT botnet C&C panels? Can you detect some sort of vulnerabilities in those C&C panels? And there are a couple of techniques that you can use there as well. Interestingly, you can go after compromising the front-end interfaces, which are used to call as, the very first time you want to log in back into the C&C panel. It can be web-based C&C panel. It can utilize Telnet as a protocol. It can, use other customized protocols. So you need to go ahead and compromise that in order to extract more information. Another interesting technique is that you can actually target the backend databases. As you all know, when these IoT C&C panels are collecting a lot of information from the compromised devices, they need to store that information somewhere. Mostly databases are used, as we all know, and you can attack those databases directly if they're connected on the internet to gain a complete control over the backend architecture. In this case is the tier 3 play, which is database. And if you compromise the database, you can dump C&C panel, admin credentials, you can get a lot of other interesting information about data exfiltration, stolen data, and sort of those things. Another interesting technique is to simply go for vulnerability exploitation in the form of like remote command execution. The idea in this case is very simple. It's just like exploiting any sort of vulnerabilities in the associated software that are being consumed by C&C panels. Reuse credential approach is important artifact as well. Sometimes what we have seen that the attackers are using weak or default passwords, or they reuse the same set of passwords for C&C panels. So you can target that point as well. So combined with all the techniques that we have discussed for analyzing IT bots, but some of the techniques that can be utilized to go ahead and attack the C&C panels, In both scenarios, you can collect a lot of interesting information to build threat intelligence. Now, moving forward, we are going to talk about interesting attack mechanisms and characteristics of IoT bots. Very important. I will reiterate again, it is essential to understand the different techniques these bots opt, basically how attackers design these bots to conduct nefarious operations on the compromised IoT devices. So let's talk about in more detail. Before going deep into it, it is important to understand the model and the attack execution of an IoT botnet. So general purpose, the way attackers are going after, they found some sort of a vulnerability in one IoT device, they build a signature and then they launch mass scanning activity, try to fingerprint the vulnerable IoT devices on the internet. If we talk about a broad-based attack, the IoT devices can be of different type. It can be a router, it can be a camera, it can be some other, DVR devices. And once these devices are compromised, the attackers use these devices as launchpads to trigger denial of service attacks, trigger additional set of attacks like launching more scanning activities, launching brute force attacks on other targeted devices. So it's a sort of a chain reaction. And now, once you understand how the IoT botnets work and the attack executes, it is essential and very important for us to understand the techniques, how these bots operate on those compromised devices, right? Let's take a look into it. So as a part of a variety of techniques, we are going to talk about all these things in detail with appropriate examples from the real world. And the idea is to show whatever we are going to discuss as attack mechanisms and characteristics, these are taken and have been seen in the real world. Some of the examples will make it more explainable when you look at it, and then you will realize, right, all these techniques are opted by the attackers to generate and design very sophisticated IoT bots. So let's get it started there. Okay. So let's first understand the distribution of IoT binaries. In the early part of the talk, we discussed about the techniques that security researchers need to use to map these exposed web servers that are hosting IoT bots. Now let's take a little bit more deep dive into it. If you look at these examples, you can clearly see the web server is hosting different set of files as simple resources, and there's no authentication and authorization controls in place. Which means if you have a direct downloadable link available, you can fetch these files directly. I think similarly, the attackers, once they compromise the IoT device, they fetch the files, which in case is the IoT bots, directly to the compromised IoT device and executes them. And you can imagine like the one downloadable link can be distributed across millions of devices, which they can fetch it and install the malicious payload and become as a part of the IoT botnet. If you look at this particular example here, this actually shows what are the contents of infected.sh file. And this typically relates to the fact that the various commands that are available in the shell file which are going to get executed once it is downloaded on the compromised device. Let's look into another example. In this particular case, you can clearly see the IoT binaries are distributed, but just take a look at the naming convention of these files. DNS, DNS scan, LDAP, LDAP scan, which are the naming convention used for legitimate tools. But in fact, these are IoT bots, or you can call as like malicious payloads. So these get downloaded onto the compromised IoT devices, and once you execute them, the compromised IoT device becomes more powerful because now it's gonna perform some actions which are unauthorized and then it can be used to do things which are not legitimate. But these are the variations we are also seeing all across when we look into the distribution mode of IoT binaries. Now look at this example. In this particular case, we are focusing primarily on the compromised hosts that are running on the cloud. In this case, it's just a Google Cloud. And you can clearly see attackers are also exploiting the exposed hosts that are running on the internet on these cloud providers. And when these hosts are not secured appropriately, they get compromised and then been utilized by attackers to host IoT bots. And this example actually reflects that. And it's just not only the one cloud. Let's take a look into the another example. In this case is an EC2 instance. We're just running a web server. As you can clearly see here. And then it also highlights what is the content of one specific file. And once the dig example highlights that the IP belongs to the Amazon EC2 instance. I mean, these EC2 instances can be controlled and operated by the customers. But the major and the primary point that what we want to highlight here is attackers are going after these resources as well. So it's just not only you have to secure your data centers, but you also want to make sure that even you are hosting and running instances on cloud providers is the responsibility of the organizations to make sure these EC2 instances are secure. We have seen many examples like that where EC2 instances or the instances running in Google environment are compromised and are distributing IoT bots. So let's move forward. Another interesting technique that what we have seen is the packing, right? So when the attackers actually download the payload onto the compromised IoT devices, the payload is actually packed. And we all know why packing is being used is just to ensure that nobody can reverse engineer it, or it becomes very difficult to look into what is the content of that payload is. In this example, what we have seen that UPX packer is being used. And if you take a look at it, the screenshot here, and when you just simply use the command file, it actually gives you what the payload is all about. And as we all know, the file command is based on the magic headers. It's going to check the topmost header of the file and try to check it with the existing database, making sure what kind of file it is, irrespective of what the extension is. And you can clearly see, when we grab and get all these strings and then look into it, the payload was packed with UPX. So this actually highlights that attackers, when they're designing IoT bots, are using packers as well to ensure the integrity is maintained for the malicious payload. And as a security researcher, when you are doing this kind of activity, you need to make sure you look into all these aspects, find a way to unpack it so that you can get internal details about the payload and how it works. So, but packing is being utilized by attackers for this kind of activity. Another interesting artifact what we have seen is the exploits are embedded in the IoT bots itself, which means if the attackers have compromised one IoT device and it is installing additional payloads or a very sophisticated IoT bot that it has designed onto the compromised device, once that payload is executed on the compromised device, the payload has a built-in feature of different exploits which can be triggered against additional set of devices on the internet. So the attacker is utilizing the one compromised IoT device as a launchpad and attacking myriad of other devices on the internet by running scanning activity and exploiting on the fly. And all these additional devices become a part of the botnet, and the target is grown, which means that the botnet grows with passage of time, and then the collective power can be harnessed to attack different things on the internet. In this particular example, if you see, the bot has a built-in exploit for a specific router. In this case, it's a Linksys router exploit. Once you reverse engineer the IoT binary, you will see that, okay, this binary has some sort of problem with it because it is going to execute an exploit against Linksys routers. And now you can going to start building your intelligence with that. But whenever you are analyzing IoT binary, make sure you are going to scan that binary and you're going to analyze that binary for known or unknown exploits that are embedded into it. Very, very important and needed. Another important technique that what we have seen is the self-deletion capability. What that exactly means. So whenever the payload gets executed onto the compromised IoT device, it performs its activities, and then it has a shell script or a shell command that it is going to auto-delete itself once it has successfully operated. This is done to ensure that the infections has successfully triggered in the IoT device, but you are not going to get some of the associated files because those files have been deleted after the execution. And if you look at the screenshot here, you can clearly see that a temp directory and several other directories are going to have some sort of operation executed by the attacker. And it is just not only going to, fetch the file, but once it is executed, it is going to delete that file as well with the command remove-rf. And this is a part of the technique of self-deletion and removal. Basically, the attacker want to, remove all the traces associated with the file that has been executed on the IoT device. Of course, the compromised one IoT device. But as a researcher, you need to ensure that whenever you are analyzing these kind of binaries or payloads, you should look for these kind of techniques and build intelligence accordingly. Very, very important to look into these kind of capabilities. Now we can a little bit also shift gears. What kind of traffic that you can see on the network? We have seen IoT bots are capable of launching mass scans. In this two examples that what we have presented here, you can clearly see a TCP/IP network connection to the port 5555, which means it's an Android debug port. So the compromised IoT device is launching a mass scanning against vulnerable Android devices on the internet. Similarly, in the second example, it's the telnet. As we discussed the concept earlier, attacker is launching a compromised IoT device to target telnet services on the additional set of IoT devices. Either it can be a brute force attack, it can be a password cracking attempts, it can be a kind of running an exploit against those devices, but the target is very, very clear. So the attacker is saying, if I'm going to get into your system, onto your IoT devices, I'm going to utilize it for nefarious purposes. And this is what is happening. So as a researcher, when you are analyzing this kind of network traffic, you need to ensure that you will look for all these kind of patterns inside the network traffic and ensure that where it is originating from and what kind of activity is happening from the network, typically focusing on IoT devices. The next one, as we all know, what they are going to do when I say the word they, which means attackers, when they are going to compromise millions of IoT devices on the internet. Denial of service is one of the most adamant attack that they actually trigger, because at the end of the day, they are just compromise the additional IoT devices on the internet, as attackers are not the owners of those IoT devices, but they control the power of those IoT devices. And if they control the power, they are going to utilize it for some sort of purposes. In this case, It is unauthorized attacks. So the attacker can direct the IoT devices running IoT bots to actually go after and launch distributed denial of service attacks. So in this example, what we have highlighted, there are a variety of denial of service attacks are being utilized by attackers, and they can pick up whatever they want, and then they can direct the botnet to actually trigger those. And we have seen this all across. So whenever you're analyzing it, you really need to look for these kind of things as well. Another very interesting artifact what we have analyzed is the usage of system tools. The attackers exploit the power of inherent operating system in the form of tools and utilize it for conducting unauthorized operations. What I mean by that is that once the IoT device is compromised, it has some sort of underlying operating system. It could be a variant of Linux, Unix, depending on the design. So what attackers do in those kind of scenarios, they utilize the system tools like the bash interpreter, they can utilize curl tool, they can use wget tool. So as you remember in the earlier part of the talk, when we discussed about exposed web server running on the internet, and they have actually hosted IoT pods. So from the IoT device, you can simply use the wget or curl tool to fetch the additional payloads from the exposed web servers onto the compromised IoT device. And nobody is going to prevent it because of the way the network traffic rules are being set up. So you can clearly see how attackers utilize the system tools in this scenario as well. The couple of examples are highlighted here. You can see wget, you can see BZBox, you can see base64 decoder, you can see Python. So it's so easy for attackers to run Python code on the compromised IoT devices as long as they support it. And BZBox is like a power play in that sense as well, because it has a lot of inherent utilities that it can support, and then you can actually go after running the code uninterrupted. So attackers don't have to worry about, hey, I need some additional tools or associated set of tools to just run my scripts or payloads. No, it's all available on the IoT devices, and they're going to utilize it. So make sure whenever you're analyzing IoT binaries, you actually go for these kind of patterns and information as well. So now I'm going to take a little bit, a break here in the sense. Let's talk about a bit of fun and profit scenario. So let's say if you are not going to go after CNC panel compromise, can we go for a crash or a kill? What I mean by that is sometimes attackers have secured the CNC panels effectively, but the way these panels are designed, the network services are being running, there is some sort of vulnerability exists with it. And as a researcher, as a threat intelligence expert, or as a security operations center analyst, you can respond differently as well. All right, now let's take a look into this case study. It is based on the fact that MIRAI CNC panel code has been reused by a lot of additional IoT botnets. What we have seen in the recent times as well, there's one of the network specific services that are being consumed by MIRAI. One can crash it. So what exactly that means? It means there is some inherent vulnerability exists in there. If you are not able to compromise the CNC panel directly, for whatever the reasons are, because it's secured efficiently, attackers have strong authentication and authorization controls in place. But as a researcher, you can still target the network service and can bring down the MIRAI panel down. So if you look at this simple code that what we have presented here is creating a socket, and all it's just doing is sending up a buffer on a continuous basis and then stopping it up. Once we put this thing in a loop, it is keep on sending the buffer and attacking the network surface making sure there is some sort of overflow happens. In our testing, what we have seen in certain versions of MIRAI, I think it can crash the service and make it unavailable for some period of time. So the basic target here is to show it's not always that you can go for controlling the CNC panel for extracting intelligence, but you can respond efficiently in other ways as well. And this one case study highlights that as well. I hope you can try that as well and enjoy and see how it looks like when you analyzing some sort of MIRAI panel running on the internet. All right. Now we are going to look into different IoT C&C panels. Now you will see how exactly these botnet C&C panels look like once you compromise them. Let's see. In this one example, you can see the different modules that are being supported by the Goon IoT Botnet. So when you run a simple command like your bots on the CNC panel of this IoT botnet, you can clearly see, how many different infections are there and what kind of variation of IoT binary is being distributed, and different modules it supports related to denial of service, related to other set of things. So generally it has a modules like methods, admin, bots, rules, clear, screen, log out, and different supporting commands. But this is how exactly the IoT CNC panel looks like. Let's take a look into another example as well. This one is related to the VERIZON IoT Botnet. Once you get an access to it, you can clearly see what exactly it supports. You can get a total number of infections, where the IoT bots are running, how you can actually utilize to launch denial of service, which exactly attacker do. But as a researcher, you can figure it out how to build intelligence out of it and then circumvent these infections accordingly. But this is how exactly the IoT botnet CNC panel looked like. Let's take a look into another example. This one is related to the Vivid IoT botnet. Once you get inside into this IoT botnet CNC panel, you can clearly see how it looks like. Infection numbers, modular sports, which we have just discussed, but it is also advertising a bit as well. What is the monthly plan you can use it. So in this case, attackers can actually provide this as a service. And in our community, we used to call it the crimeware as a service, because in this case, they don't have to work on, installing the CNC panel, getting to, finding and distributing infections. Rather, they just simply go ahead and rent out this infrastructure and just pay them the service under the hood of crimeware as a service. So very important to understand from the perspective of threat intelligence, but this all exists in this world. And some of these examples, what we have provided, validates that. Now we have looked into some of the example of IoT botnet CNC panels. So what next? We are going to look into the demonstration, focusing on how inherently CNC panels are designed and how it looks like in a real world is a part of our demonstrations. But before moving further, I want to reiterate what we have discussed so far. So we started with analyzing IoT botnet threat landscape. We discussed some of the techniques related to IoT botnet hunting and compromising CNC panels. Then we took a shift and we analyzed understanding what is the IoT botnet attack execution model and the different attack tactics and techniques, including mechanisms opted by attackers to design IoT bots. After that, we looked into one of the simple case study for fun and profit of MIRAI botnet, how you can even go after and kill the service. Once we did all that, we shifted our gears towards analyzing IoT botnet CNC panels. what are the inherent design, how it works, different kind of modules it supports. Now, let's look into the demonstration. In this example, what we are going to highlight is how the Verizon IoT Botnet C&C panel look like in a real time. Just enjoy the video and see how it looks like. Different tools it supports right now, different attack methods that are available for launching denial of service attacks. And that's all for now. It's a short and crisp video to highlight when you log in back into the C&C panel, how it looks like, how you really need to run commands and see what is available there. So let's move forward and look into the another example. This one is a bit detailed one because what we are going to show right now is a number of IoT Botnet C&C panel here. And you will get more information, like it's just not only the one IoT C&C panel for the botnet. There are myriad out there. Just enjoy this video. You can see variation exactly here. So this is a IoT botnet, as you can see on the screen as well. Now logging back into the C&C panel of other botnet. There we go. This one is another example of IoT Botnet C&C panel. You can see the number of infections, which was kind of in early stages. Modules it supports. Another example of the DELETION IoT Botnet. Let's see. Oh, it just have only 48 infections, early stages. And there it comes, the message from the IoT Botnet administrator. So overall, what we have highlighted here is how these IoT Botnet C&C panels look like. It's not easy to actually get access to these C&C panels because you have to do a lot of work earlier to build intelligence, finding where these C&C panels are located, by analyzing binaries, by analyzing network traffic, by conducting reverse engineering, and all the techniques and tactics that we have discussed earlier. The primary purpose for this kind of work is to build intelligence, making sure that we remain 2 steps ahead of our adversaries in making our internet infrastructure secure. So with that, what's the inference out here? After digging so deep into the world of IoT botnets, we believe that there is a requirement and that there is a need for building multifaceted approach to generate intelligence in order to subvert and defend against threats in the IoT hemisphere. We cannot circumvent the attacks that are targeted against IoT devices by just following one way or one model of security. Apart from defense in depth, we need multifaceted approach. We need to look into all aspects of IoT device design and making sure we obtain visibility into each and every aspect of it, making sure security controls are implemented very effectively and efficiently. And this is the message I always prefer to give. Being in this industry for more than 14 years, this is the reality of the security world. It is nothing new out there, but it is actually up to you whether you really want to do it or not. For example, if you're simply doing some sort of configuration change, have you validated it efficiently? Have you make sure that the configuration is not gonna impact the security? And if we revert it back to the simple concept, it's all about how you want to do security, how much understanding you have about your security. And that is the target approach. Nothing new, but it's the way you do it. And that's why we believe that security is a continuous process, not a one time shot. It's a long shot that you have to actually go after on continuous basis. With that, any questions and queries you have, I'll be more than happy to discuss. I'm really looking forward for your feedback and to understand how you feel about this talk, any suggestions you have so that we can learn from each other. And with that, thank you very much. I would like to say my appreciation to the Hack in Paris Conference Security Committee as well for creating such a fantastic conference and allowing researchers to utilize the podium for sharing the research work. Once again, thank you very much. Really appreciate that you attend this talk and have a great time at the conference. Take care. Bye.